Good day from the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and welcome to our coverage of the arrival of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft to the International Outpost. Here in the Flight Control Room, everything is going per the plan. All of Dragon's systems are operating perfectly as it is entering the final phase of a 36-hour rendezvous from the launch pad and its launch on Friday afternoon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station to ultimately its arrival at the station, where it will be installed and bolted into place on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. This is the third cargo ship to arrive at the International Laboratory in the last 15 days. 2 weeks ago, back on March 26th, the orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft arrived at the station and was installed on the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. And just 8 days ago, the Russian ISS Progress 63 cargo craft arrived at the station. Today's arrival of Dragon completes a threefold success of 3 cargo ships in just 15 days, delivering some 12 tons of supplies and experiments for the Expedition 47 crew on the International Space Station. Here in the Flight Control Room, the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers on console. They are the lead team for the SpaceX arrival and installation of Dragon today. The flight director on console on the far right of your screen is Flight Director Amit Kshatriya. He is joined on his right by astronaut Serena Aunan, who will be talking directly to the space station crew as we proceed through the arrival of Dragon, its capture, and ultimate installation on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module later this morning. The Dragon itself is moving to a point, as you can see in this downlink view from external cameras on the International Space Station, to a point some 350 meters directly below the International Space Station, along what is called the radial vector, or the R-bar. That's the imaginary line drawn between the space station and the center of the Earth. Once it arrives directly below the station, a series of carefully planned burns of the Dragon's thrusters will inch the Dragon up the R-bar, or the radial vector, towards a capture point, at which time the station's robotic arm, the Canadarm2, operated by European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, along with the assistance of NASA astronaut Jeff Williams, they are inside the cupola at the robotics workstation of the International Space Station. They will use the arm to reach out and grapple the Dragon spacecraft, and later this morning install it to that Earth-facing port on the Harmony module, the first time that 2 U.S. commercial cargo ships will have parked side by side at the International complex. All of the rendezvous maneuvers, the burns for Dragon, have been running slightly behind schedule throughout the course of the morning. Nothing amiss with the Dragon. All of its systems are operating perfectly, but a slight increase in atmospheric drag has caused the Dragon ballistics officers at the Dragon Flight Control Room in Hawthorne, California for SpaceX, that you see in this view, to recompute all of those rendezvous burns. They're running some 30 minutes behind in all of those burns. Some of that time might be made up once Dragon begins its traverse up the radial vector towards the capture point for the Canadarm2. But right now we're running about 30 minutes behind schedule. Very difficult to predict an actual grapple time. Originally, it had been set for 6 a.m. Central Time, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Almost assuredly, that will run slightly later than that, perhaps as late as 6:34, which would be the expiration of the first daylight capture window. There is nothing magic or urgent about making that first capture window. If all of the conditions are not right at that point, we could simply sit still and sit tight with Dragon at a final gate post of about 30 meters away from its capture point for Peake and Williams until the next lighting window becomes available. So we'll wait and see how the rendezvous proceeds. It is possible that SpaceX's mission director Paul Tompkins might be comfortable as SpaceX's Dragon craft moves up the radial vector to shorten the amount of station keeping time at the various stopping points at 250 meters and then at 30 meters, so we could make up some lost time during that traverse up the radial vector. We'll have to stand by and wait and see how things go once we get there. You can see the thrusters firing on the Dragon, all of its systems in excellent shape. And again, the capture time could be slightly behind schedule, behind its original plan of 6 a.m. Central Time, and we'll continue to keep you posted as we get more updated information. The International Space Station and Dragon have passed into an orbital sunset, moving over the northwestern Pacific Ocean at this point, moving in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator, moving from northwest to southeast. Again, all of Dragon's systems are in excellent shape. As mentioned a moment ago, Dragon's journey to the International Space Station on this 8th resupply mission for the SpaceX cargo craft began with a spectacular launch under a cloudless sky at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida on Friday afternoon, with liftoff occurring at 3:43 p.m. Central Time, 4:43 p.m. Eastern Time. The Falcon 9 rocket rose from Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral and less than 11 minutes later deposited the Dragon spacecraft into its preliminary orbit. Dragon's solar arrays unfurled on time, and all of its approach activities since then have gone extremely well. Again, a spectacular launch occurring Friday afternoon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station to send the Dragon on its two-day rendezvous to the International Space Station. The Dragon will actually remain attached to the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module until May 11th. That is its current departure date. It will bring home with it valuable scientific experiments and actual blood and urine samples that were taken during the journey of the one-year crew of Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko that ended back on March 2nd with their return to Earth. In all, the Dragon is taking some 3,789 pounds of pressurized cargo inside the spacecraft itself, 3,422 pounds of unpressurized cargo. The major payload in that unpressurized cargo sitting in the trunk of the Dragon is the beam, the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module. That is the module that will be extracted from the trunk of Dragon next Saturday by robotics officers here in Mission Control and maneuvered to an installation point on the aft port of the Tranquility Module, where it will be installed and bolted into place to spend 2 years on the aft port of Tranquility, serving as a prototype and a test bed for possible inflatable and expandable habitats that may one day be used for future deep space exploration. The beam itself weighs 3,119 pounds. Again, its extraction and installation onto the aft port of the Tranquility module is anticipated next Saturday, April 16th, in the wee hours, with extraction beginning at about 1:15 a.m. Central Time. We'll be providing live coverage of its installation on the aft port of Tranquility at 4:30 a.m. Central Time next Saturday morning, April 16th. There is an animation of its extraction from the trunk of Dragon by the robotic arm, the Canadarm2. It will be slowly and carefully maneuvered into place toward the aft port of the Tranquility module, where it will be installed, and like any other module arriving at the International Space Station, it will be installed into a common berthing mechanism, as you see, and then bolted into place to form a hard mate to that aft port of Tranquility. Once that occurs, there will be leak checks that will be conducted to make sure that we have a tight seal between the beam and the berthing interface on the Tranquility module. It then will spend several weeks being thermally conditioned at that aft port of tranquility before it is actually expanded to its full dimensions. And again, you can see this animation of what the likely expansion scenarios look like. Beam, once expanded, will remain as such for the next 2 years. The first actual ingress by crew members on board the International Space Station would be scheduled to occur about 1 week after the beam is expanded into its full geometric proportion. Here in the flight control room, the visiting vehicle officer, Paul Lane, reports that the Dragon cargo craft has reached its 350-meter point along the radial vector directly below the International Space Station. This occurring about 30 minutes or so behind schedule. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, all of the activities have been running slightly behind schedule because of the need to recompute the rendezvous burns by the SpaceX Dragon mission ballistics team in Hawthorne, California, due to an increase in atmospheric drag. Dragon systems are operating perfectly by the book, no issues whatsoever with Dragon, as we anticipate an arrival and a capture of Dragon within the next 2 hours. The exact grapple time, difficult to predict at this point. We'll get a better handle on that once Dragon begins its final approach up the radial vector from directly below the International Space Station to its capture point. In the cupola at the workstation, the robotics workstation, European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, who has been aboard the station since mid-December and who will remain aboard the station until his return to Earth, along with Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra and Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko in June. There's the view that they're seeing in a robotics workstation monitor as they look at the strobe light on the Dragon near that circle in the middle of the screen. They'll be monitoring the exact corridor of approach and the range between Dragon and the capture point, at which time Peake will extend the Canadarm2 robotic arm to a point where it will affix itself to the grapple fixture that was exposed about 2 hours and 20 minutes after launch on Friday, when the guidance, navigation, and control bay doors were opened on the Dragon spacecraft to not only expose its sensors for its rendezvous operations that have been proceeding perfectly since launch about 36 hours or so ago. The grapple fixture also was exposed at the time that the GNNC bay doors were opened on Friday evening, and so all of Dragon systems since then have been operating in spectacular fashion. As it sits at the 350-meter hold point directly below the International Space Station, Dragon is being commanded to conduct a yaw maneuver. This is the maneuver that places the grapple fixture and presents the grapple fixture directly toward the Canadarm2 for its capture that will take place within the next 2 hours. Once Dragon is captured and installed on the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station, there will be 6 vehicles at the station for only the second time in station history. The first time that occurred was the final flight of Discovery on the STS-133 mission 5 years ago. That was the only other time that as many as 6 different vehicles have been at the International Space Station. As we mentioned earlier, this is the 3rd cargo craft to arrive at the station in the past 15 days, a total of 12 tons of supplies and experiments being delivered to the station between the orbital ATK Cygnus craft, the Russian ISS Progress 63 vehicle that is currently docked to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, and today's arrival of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft, which of course is the only craft that can return cargo intact, with Dragon's departure and splashdown in the Pacific scheduled for May 11th. Dragon now has completed its yaw maneuver. We're expecting it to depart the 350-meter hold point. The next station keeping point would come at 250 meters. It's about an 8-minute transit from 350 meters out to 250 meters out. And again, we'll keep you posted as the SpaceX mission ballistics team in Hawthorne, California continues to compute how much time would be required at the various stopping points, the station keeping points, to see if we can make up time to approach the original grapple time that was 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern. And here in the flight control room in Houston, visiting vehicle officer Paul Lane has reported that Dragon has now resumed its approach up the radial vector from directly below the International Space Station to its ultimate capture point. It has now departed the 350-meter station keeping point and is heading to 250 meters. With its strobe light clearly flashing in this view from the truss cameras on the International Space Station, Dragon is making its way toward the 250-meter station keeping point. We expect to arrive there in about 4.5 minutes for another period of station keeping, at which time the SpaceX flight controllers in Hawthorne, California, will have an opportunity to check Dragon systems and see whether or not we actually need to wait a full 15 minutes at the 250-meter point, or whether we can shorten that interval to try to make up some time that was lost earlier in the morning through atmospheric drag conditions that put us about 30 minutes behind the timeline. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Dragon. All of its systems are in perfect shape. It is operating to perfection and has been since its launch on Friday afternoon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, just running a bit behind schedule in the burns, which were recomputed by the SpaceX ballistics engineers in Hawthorne, California, to compensate for some slightly increased atmospheric drag between its launch and the time now as it approaches its final capture point just a few meters away from the International Space Station. Aboard the International Space Station, European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake is the prime robotics officer for today's activities. He is in the cupola at the robotics workstation, joined by NASA flight engineer Jeff Williams. Tim Copra, the Expedition 47 commander, is monitoring Dragon's systems. Also hovering nearby, Peake and Williams, as they concentrate on the robotics part of today's choreographed capture of the Dragon spacecraft. Once Dragon is captured, the robotics will be handed over to the robotics officer here in Mission Control, who goes under the call sign of Robo.
The field of illumination of the light of camera 24, and whether if we optimize it at 4 meters, but then bias it toward the tip lee if that's adequate angle to give good illumination all the way into capture.
And Jeff, we're checking.
Jeff Williams checking with the flight control team here in Houston on the management of lights on the Canadarm2 to provide slightly better illumination at the time of capture of Dragon. Simply fine-tuning some of the illumination points to optimize the lighting that would be available at the time of capture. Again, the original grapple time or capture time was 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern. We likely will be slightly behind that time. How much slightly behind we will be remains to be seen, but we'll keep you posted as we get a bit closer. Dragon is currently approaching the 250-meter hold point as it begins to put the brakes on once again. All of Dragon's systems are in excellent shape. Peak and Williams in the robotics workstation in the cupola, ready to take control of the Canadarm2 to reach out and grapple Dragon for its ultimate installation on the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module, the first time that two commercial U.S. cargo vehicles, Cygnus and Dragon, will be parked side by side. And Dragon has now arrived at the 250-meter hold point. The next Dragon to be launched on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket on the 9th commercial resupply mission for SpaceX will contain the...
Hey, Jeff, sorry for the wait there. We were just chatting down here about this, and it turns out in the past we've actually done multiple night captures without any SSRMS lights. The feeling is the tip elbow light won't provide a whole lot. Overall, where it's actually pointed right now, it does provide the best lighting of that interface that you're looking at. And in the past, we've done captures just with the CETA and the truss lights on, and right now we do have all the external lights on. And we expect the lighting conditions to be sufficient with these lights at capture.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you, Sarita.
And in addition, you're now go to confirm the 250-meter hold for step 2 in 1.102.
Step 2 in work.
All of Dragon's navigation systems are reported to be in excellent shape as it sits biding its time for a few minutes here at the 250-meter hold point. Once the SpaceX mission director, Paul Tompkins, is happy with what he's seeing, then Dragon will continue its trek up the R-bar, the radial vector, towards its ultimate capture point. Dragon will pass through 100 meters, arriving at its final station-keeping point at 30 meters. Again, as I was mentioning, the next SpaceX flight to the International Space Station will carry within the trunk of Dragon the first international docking adapter, the IDA that will be installed on the forward end of pressurized mating adapter number 2 at the forward end of the U.S. segment of the International Space Station, called IDA-2. Of course, the first of the IDAs was lost in the SpaceX accident back in June of 2015. But the next international docking adapter, or the first of the 2, will be installed at the forward end of pressurized mating adapter number 2. The second of which, called IDA number 3, will be installed on the space-facing side of the Harmony module. Those international docking adapters, of course, will be the ports of call for the commercial crew vehicles, the Crew Dragon and the Boeing CST-100 vehicles that will be arriving at the International Space Station, carrying crews for operations within the International Space Station and to expand the size of the station crew incrementally over the course of the next few years.
We're good, thanks.
Dragon sitting there at 250 meters away from the International Space Station as it and the station itself fly 250 statute miles above the Pacific Ocean, moving from northwest to southeast.
We have an abort arm light and a resume arm light. And of course we have the flashing LED on hold. Execute.
Copy, good report.
Your You're looking over the shoulder of both Tim Peake and Jeff Williams, who are the arm operators, the Canadarm2 operators for today's capture of the Dragon. Once Dragon is grappled, the operation for the arm to maneuver Dragon to its installation position will be handed off to the robotics officer here in Mission Control. You can see in this animation how this all works. The back end of Dragon, if you will, contains the beam, the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module. Its day in the sun, if you will, comes next Saturday, when it will be extracted and installed on the aft port of the Tranquility module. But the robotics officer will go through a very glacial process of maneuvering Dragon to a ready-to-latch position along the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of Harmony, at which point it will ultimately be bolted in place, a first stage capture, followed by a second stage capture, and then Dragon will be firmly attached to the Earth-facing side of the U.S. segment of the International Space Station. A few items being checked off on the navigational checklist by the visiting vehicle officer here in Mission Control before our flight director here in Houston, Amit Kshatriya, the lead flight director for SpaceX-8, gives his go to his counterpart in Hawthorne, the SpaceX mission director Paul Tompkins, to send the commands for Dragon to proceed inside 250 meters. And Flight Director Amit Kshatriya has told Tompkins that we are go for approach inside 250 meters, the command to be issued momentarily.
Station Houston on 2 for Dragon.
Go ahead.
MCC Hawthorne and MCC Houston are ready for Dragon approach inside the keep-out sphere. Your go to command and monitor approach from 250 meters for step 3 in 1.102.
Copy. Step 3 in work. Go to command Dragon. Resume for Block A.
Spacecraft communicator Serena Anand here in Mission Control, relaying up to flight engineer Jeff Williams that all parties are go for the approach of Dragon inside 250 meters, better known as the keep-out sphere, the final corridor, if you will, for the terminal rendezvous and final approach. One more stopping point at 30 meters will be coming shortly, and a final assessment of Dragon systems will be made before a similar go will be given for capture.
And Houston Station, the resume execute has been commanded.
We copy.
And we're in approach mode, and we see the rate increasing.
Copy.
And Dragon has resumed its approach inside 250 meters. Should take approximately 30 minutes or so to arrive at the 30-meter hold point, which again is the final milestone for an assessment of Dragon's systems before the flight control team in Hawthorne for SpaceX, as well as the NASA flight control team here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston give their joint approval for final approach and capture.
And Houston Station, reference to Block B. Block B looks good with the following comments on camera 3. It looks like we have about 2.5 WIS support, and almost centered on camera 9, so it appears to be converging as.
Copy that, Jeff. Sounds good.
With Dragon moving inside 250 meters to a final hold point at 30 meters, with its arrival expected about 30 minutes from now. The ballistics officers, the visiting vehicle officer here in Mission Control, currently recomputing a possible capture time, which could be in the neighborhood now of about 6:30 a.m. Central. But again, that's very preliminary, and we'll keep you posted as we move along. This is Mission Control Houston. To recap where we're at, you're looking at a view of the strobe light flashing on the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft, loaded with some 3.5 tons of supplies and experiments for the International Space Station, including the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module that will be extracted and installed on the aft port of the Tranquility Module of the station next Saturday morning in the wee hours. Dragon is moving from a point 250 meters away from the station to a final station keeping point at 30 meters with an expected arrival time about 27 minutes from now. All of Dragon's systems are operating perfectly.
For Dragon is inside the 200-meter keep-out sphere. The crew now has the authority to issue an abort if there is no comm with MCC Houston and the light is outside the corridor.
Station copies.
Spacecraft communicator Serena Onen briefing Jeff Williams on board the station as to the fact that Dragon is inside 200 meters and thus the crew now has the capability, if required, to issue an abort command should anything crop up with Dragon systems that are untoward. However, Dragon is rock solid right now. No issues being reported whatsoever with all of its systems and navigational capability.
Again, continues to converge.
Copy. Good news.
The current plan, once Dragon is attached to the Earth-facing port of Harmony later today,
exercise right after capture. We just want to make sure that in case we get pushed a little bit, that he's not exercising during capture. We were just taking a look at Optimus down here.
And he's listening.
Excellent.
After Dragon is captured and then robotically installed and bolted into place on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module, there will be a leak check period to make sure we have a tight seal between Dragon and the station side of the Harmony Common Berthing Mechanism interface. That will be followed by the installation of hardware in the small vestibule or passageway between Dragon and the International Space Station itself, paving the way for the opening of the hatch to Dragon in the very early morning hours on Monday. The station and Dragon are currently approaching the southern coast of Chile, about to begin a swing across the southern Atlantic Ocean that will carry the two spacecraft over the western coast of Africa a short time from now. Again, everything continuing to go very smoothly with Dragon's incremental approach from a point directly below the International Space Station to a capture point with an approximate capture time of about 6:30 a.m. Central, 7:30 a.m. Eastern. That is the current predicted time. Slightly behind schedule due to some recomputation that was required by the ballistics team, both here in Houston and at SpaceX's control center in Hawthorne, California, based on atmospheric drag and the approach required by Dragon for its successful capture by the robotic arm officers Tim Peake and Jeff Williams, who are standing by in the cupola at the robotics workstation there. As the Dragon cargo craft grows larger in the field of view, as you can see here from a truss camera on the International Space Station, Flight Director Amit Kshatriya here in the flight control room in Houston is discussing with his flight controllers the final review of the flight rules that will ultimately lead to a go, no-go decision for Dragon's approach inside 30 meters. Flying 250 miles over the South Atlantic, we just had a great view of the Dragon cargo craft before losing temporarily our downlink television capability from the International Space Station. Dragon is approaching the 30-meter arrival point. Should get there about 20 minutes from now, at which time it'll put the brakes on one final time and permit the flight control teams here in Houston and at SpaceX's control center in Hawthorne, California, to take a final look-see at all of Dragon's systems before the final go is given to approach inside 30 meters and capture. And back with our downlink television view of the Dragon. Earlier this morning, it maneuvered itself, yawed basically into the grapple orientation, presenting its grapple fixture directly in the line of sight with the end effector of the Canadarm2 robotic arm that will reach out under the control of European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, backed up by NASA flight engineer Jeff Williams, to reach out and capture Dragon. at which point the operation for robotics will be handed off to the robotics officer here in Mission Control to maneuver Dragon to the Earth-facing port of Harmony for its ultimate installation and its bolting into place.
Copy, Jeff. Good report.
That's with a range of 105 meters.
Copy that.
Jeff Williams reporting back to spacecraft communicator Serena Annan here in Mission Control that everything is looking good on the Dragon. Peak and Williams in the cupola at the robotics workstation, backed up by Expedition 47 Commander Tim Copra, who is also monitoring Dragon systems as it makes its methodical trek up the radial vector directly below the International Space Station. First, it will arrive at the 30-meter station keeping point about 17 minutes from now, and then ultimately will resume its final approach for capture that will take place with the robotic arm, the Canadarm2, as you can see in this animated depiction. Dragon arriving at the capture point just a few meters away from the station. The robotic arm will reach out and capture Dragon, at which point the operation is handed off to the robotics officer in Mission Control to maneuver the Dragon toward the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module and its ultimate parking place right next door to the orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft that arrived at the International Space Station back on March 26th. Dragon now 100 meters away from the International Space Station, about 15 minutes away from its arrival at the 30-meter station keeping point. Dragon now just 85 meters away from the International Space Station, flying over the South Atlantic. Its approach continuing to go by the book, no issues whatsoever with the SpaceX cargo craft. Expected arrival at the 30-meter station keeping point, its final station keeping point, about 12.5 minutes from now. Dragon continues A flawless approach to its final station keeping point of 30 meters. Should arrive there in about 8 minutes from now. The distance between Dragon and the International Space Station currently calculated at about 63 meters as the station and the SpaceX cargo craft approach the southwest coast of Africa. We are currently estimating a capture time of around 6:30 a.m. Central, 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll keep you posted on whether or not that will stick or be improved upon once Dragon reaches its 30-meter station keeping point.
Port.
Copy that, Jeff. Sounds good.
Dragon and the International Space Station now just 52 meters apart, approaching the coast of Namibia, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. All of Dragon's systems continue to operate perfectly, approaching the 30-meter station keeping point some 5 minutes from now. Nestled inside the aft end, or the trunk, of the Dragon is the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, the beam, 3,100 pounds, a habitat of a prototype that will be extracted from the trunk of Dragon in the wee hours next Saturday, April 16th, and installed on the aft port of the Tranquility Module to begin a 2-year stay at the International Space Station for testing of its ability to withstand the rigors of space. An installation next Saturday would set the stage for a likely date of May 26th or so, somewhere in that neighborhood, of the actual expansion of the module to its full volumetric measurement. The ingress by the crew, the first ingress into beam, would be 1 week after it's expanded to its full volume. Dragon now 41 meters away from the International Space Station.
Space Ground 2 at 40 meters. I will call the vehicle on camera 3-1 with port.
We copy.
Jeff Williams keeping tabs in the cupola on the relative position of Dragon towards the overlay that the crew is watching from the robotics workstation. Tim Peake will be the prime robotics operator to maneuver the Canadarm2 into position to grapple Dragon. Once again, this is the third cargo vehicle to arrive at the station in 15 days. 2 weeks ago, the orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft arrived at the station and was installed on the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. Last Saturday, the ISS Progress 63 cargo craft, the Russian resupply vehicle, arrived for an automated docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, and today it's Dragon's turn to be installed a bit later this morning at a parking place right next door to Cygnus, the first time that two U.S. commercial cargo vehicles will have resided at the International Space Station simultaneously, and this will be only the second time in station history that as many as 6 vehicles will be at the International Space Station, the only other time occurring in 2011 on the final flight of the Shuttle Discovery to the station, STS-133. Cygnus, Dragon, 2 Progress resupply craft, and 2 Soyuz vehicles will all be at the International Space Station simultaneously. And the visiting vehicle officer here in Mission Control reports that Dragon is now holding at 30 meters. This typically would be about a 24-minute hold point to afford the engineers at the SpaceX Control Center in Hawthorne, California, that you see there in this view, an opportunity to assess Dragon systems, and for the flight control team here in Houston to do the same before Flight Director Ahmed Shatria here in Houston tags up with SpaceX Mission Director Paul Tompkins to get a final go for approach and capture. Dependent on the condition of Dragon systems, all of which are operating flawlessly.
Dragon is at the 30-meter hold. We are performing our assessments on the ground, and we'll let you know shortly when you are go to proceed with step 4 in 1.102.
Station copies. We're holding on step 4.
Once all the navigational computations are completed, it is possible that the final approach for capture could be initiated ahead of the current schedule. That would put us closer to the original timeline for capture. We're in a loss of our downlink television capability from the station for about the next 17 minutes or so, while we hand over to one satellite to another on the tracking and data relay satellite system. Again, all of Dragon's systems have operated to perfection to this point, as it sits passively at 30 meters away from the International Space Station. Flight controllers both here in Houston and in Hawthorne, California, assessing Dragon and assessing the point at which final approval will be given to resume terminal approach and capture of the cargo craft.
Station Houston on 2 for Dragon, your go to confirm the 30-meter hold for step 4 in 1.102.
Station copies, and we can confirm VV mode is hold. Prime range is 30.8 and secondary range is 31.3. We'll leave the light as is for now, and step 3 is in work of 1.110.
We copy. Good readback.
SpaceX Mission Director Paul Tompkins in Hawthorne, California, has provided his approval to Flight Director Amit Kshatriya here in Mission Control for final approach for capture. We will be awaiting final report from the crew, Tim Peake and Jeff Williams in the cupola at the robotics workstation to make sure that they're all set to begin the maneuvering of the Canadarm2 into its grapple position. But everything is continuing to proceed very, very smoothly. All of Dragon's systems are rock solid. This is Mission Control Houston. As you look at the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Houston, the team under the direction of Flight Director Amit Kshatriya at the moment, as we stand by for a final go for approach to the capture point for the Dragon cargo craft. The robotic arm under the control of European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake is in motion. Peake, the prime robotics officer for the capture of the SpaceX cargo craft this morning, backed up by NASA flight engineer Jeff Williams. Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra is monitoring Dragon's systems during the terminal phase of this rendezvous. That began with the launch of Dragon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida on Friday afternoon. Dragon and the station just 30 meters apart from one another, currently flying 250 statute miles over southern Iran. The robotics officer in mission control here reports that the arm is in the so-called high hover position, which puts it at the correct point for Dragon to resume its approach inside 30 meters.
The arm in the high hover position. So when you guys are ready, we can send the command to resume approach.
And Houston, SSRMS is in the high hover position. We are going to proceed.
And Jeff, that was a little broken. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, station, we concur. SSRMS is in the high hover position.
Spacecraft communicator Serena Anand here in Mission Control, communicating with Jeff Williams, just ensuring that the robotic arm is in the right configuration before the approval is given formally to resume final approach for capture. Just waiting for the crew to report that everything is in readiness in the cupola at the robotics workstation.
But when you're done with step 3.3, the capture briefing, just let us know.
Welcome.
A couple of the external cameras are being reconfigured. Aboard the International Space Station, Peake, Williams, and Kopra are in a final internal tag-up in the cupola to make sure that they're at the ready for the capture of Dragon before it resumes its approach on commanding from the SpaceX Mission Control Team in Hawthorne, California. There's a view of the SpaceX control room on this Sunday morning. Everything since launch has gone perfectly for the Dragon cargo craft, which is arriving at the station today to deliver 3.5 tons of supplies and experiments. That includes the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, the beam that will be extracted from the trunk of Dragon next Saturday morning in the wee hours and installed to the aft port of the Tranquility Module. This animated depiction shows the work that will be done next Saturday morning, April 16th, as beam is extracted from the trunk of Dragon and under the control of the robotics officer here in Mission Control, maneuvered to the aft port of Tranquility, where it will be installed and bolted into place for a 2-year stay to test the prototypical use of expandable habitats for deep space exploration. Flight Director Amit Kshatriya here in Mission Control has told his counterpart in Hawthorne, Paul Tompkins of SpaceX,
Dragon is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
Station copies.
All parties are now go for final approach the command to be issued momentarily by the SpaceX flight control team. We should be regaining our downlink television capability from the International Space Station a couple of minutes from now. Everything continuing to go very smoothly. All of Dragon's systems are in excellent shape. And Dragon now is on final approach. Dragon is expected to arrive at its capture point about 16 minutes from now. At that time, the flight control team here in Houston will give a final go for capture, at which point Tim Peake, with the assistance of Jeff Williams and the cupola at the robotics workstation, will begin to extend the Canadarm2 robotics arm towards the grapple fixture of Dragon, affixing the snares to that grapple fixture to complete the 36-hour journey for Dragon from the launch pad at Cape Canaveral to the International Space Station.
Station Houston on 2, Dragon has begun approach from 30 meters. Your go to monitor per step 5 in 1.102.
Station copies, monitoring per step 5.
And the final approach call from Capcom Serena Anand here in Mission Control as the International Space Station and Dragon fly 250 statute miles over northwest China. Standing by for a reacquisition of our downlink television capability from the International Space Station.
Houston Station, Space Ground 2, we see approach mode at 27 meters and closing, and Block B is good.
Copy.
And just to complete the record, I can verify LEDs.
Copy.
Excellent view of Dragon at about the 24-meter point. Currently flying over the border between China and Mongolia. The expectation is that capture will be accomplished before we go into an orbital sunset. However, if the current approach of Dragon does not permit a grapple within the daylight lighting condition capability, we'll simply sit tight and wait for the next daylight opportunity at the next orbital sunrise. There is no rush here, no time constraint to actual grapple of Dragon. We are about 9 minutes away from moving into an orbital sunset, with the next orbital sunrise not expected until about 6:46 a.m. Central Time. So once again, we'll stand by and see the current rate of Dragon's approach and whether the crew is comfortable with a grapple of Dragon either at or near orbital sunset. "24 meters separating Dragon from the International Space Station. A good view from the end effector camera on Canadarm2. At the very bottom of Dragon, out of the field of view at the moment, is the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, the beam that will be extracted by this same robotic arm next Saturday morning in the wee hours by the robotics officer here in Mission Control and maneuvered to a position for installation on the aft port of the Tranquility module. Dragon will be parked at the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module in a parking space right next to the orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft that arrived at the station back on March 26th, 2 weeks ago. These two U.S. commercial cargo craft arriving at the station sandwiched around the Russian resupply craft, the ISS Progress 63, that automatically docked to the aft port of the Zvezda service module 8 days ago. As mentioned earlier, but worth noting once again, once Dragon is attached to the Earth-facing port of Harmony later this morning, it will mark only the second time in station history that 6 vehicles will be at the station at the same time, the only other time being the STS-133 mission, the final flight of the shuttle Discovery back in 2011. We're currently approaching an orbital sunset. There is margin, however, for the crew to continue to proceed on with the capture of Dragon for several minutes after orbital sunset. This will be a crew-dependent comfort factor that they'll be determining on their own as we get a bit closer to the capture time itself. We're about 6 minutes away from capture point. Dragon just 18 meters away. Tim Peake and Jeff Williams are at the controls of the station's robotic arm, the Canadarm2. They're working from the cupola at the robotics workstation. Tim Peake and Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra, along with Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko in their 118th day in space. Jeff Williams backing up Tim Peake for this robotic capture of Dragon that will occur a short time from now, beginning his 4th week aboard the International Space Station along with cosmonauts Alexei Ovchinin and Alex Gorpochka. The 3 cosmonauts are gearing up for a significant holiday on Tuesday of this week, April 12th, which is the 55th anniversary of the launch of Yuri Gagarin as the first human to fly in space. Cosmonautics Day to be observed aboard the International Space Station. But first things first, as the station and Dragon pass over the northern islands of Japan, moving from northwest to southeast. The Dragon cargo craft launched on Friday afternoon from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida aboard the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Entered its preliminary orbit about 10 minutes after launch, deployed its solar arrays, and began the trek toward the International Space Station that will culminate soon with its capture by European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake using the Canadarm2 robotic arm. Dragon about 13 meters away from the station.
In Houston Station on 2, FYI, we have commanded the strobe off.
We concur. Good idea. Thank you.
A good view of the grapple fixture that the robotic arm will attach itself to, and at the very top of the Dragon is the passive common berthing mechanism that will be mated to the active common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module following capture and the robotic maneuver of the spacecraft to its installation position later today. And Dragon has now arrived at its capture point.
Station Houston on 2 for Dragon. Your go to confirm capture point hold for step 6 in 1.102.
Copy, step 6 in work.
The next step will be the approval for Tim Peake to begin the extension of the Canadarm2 for the grapple of Dragon, which is now about 10 meters away from the International Space Station.
Conditions are confirmed and the crew is ready for Dragon capture.
Copy that. Stand by for capture.
Standing by.
SpaceX is go for capture. The flight control team here is go for capture. That word about to be relayed up to the crew, at which point Tim Peake can begin extending the robotic arm for grapple.
And Station Houston on 2, you are go for capture sequence. Perform step 4 in 1.110 Dragon capture and begin monitoring the backaway cue card.
Copy, go for capture in step 4.
The visiting vehicle officer here in Mission Control reports the Dragon is stable, very stable, as we stand by for arm motion. And the Canadarm2 now in motion toward the grapple fixture of Dragon. Dragon very stable. The International Space Station will be put in free drift with no thruster firing capability at the time of capture to ensure that no perturbations are placed on the Dragon spacecraft at the time that the snares on the end effector of the Canadarm2 grapple on to the grapple fixture itself. The end effector is 3 meters away from grapple. The space station now in free drift. One meter. The end effector is approaching the pin, standing by for capture. Capture confirmed. At 6:23 a.m. Central Time over the Pacific Ocean west of Hawaii. A cornucopia of cargo craft now at the International Space Station. Capture again confirmed at 6:23 a.m. Central Time. Capture is now complete. A good view of applause coming from the flight controllers at the SpaceX Control Center in Hawthorne, California.
And Houston Station on Space to Ground 2, we show load safe, and looks like we caught a Dragon, and you'll go for post reconfiguration.
Copy station, there are smiles all around here. Nice job capturing that Dragon.
Many thanks.
And Houston Station on Space to Ground 2, we also wanted to take a moment to recognize the lead mission director for CRS-8, Paul Tompkins. You know, as crew, we recognize how important mission operations is for the success of every mission and every space flight. And so we wanted to specifically thank Paul for leading his team through return to flight and Dragon's mission to the International Space Station.
And Tim, we copy all here in Houston, and SpaceX said they copied in Hawthorne. Thank you so much for your kind words. We absolutely agree.
Tim Peake first acknowledging the capture of Dragon, followed up by words from Expedition 47 Commander Tim Kopra, recognizing the SpaceX mission director Paul Tompkins for his efforts in returning the Dragon cargo craft to the International Space Station 10 months after an accident on the last resupply flight.
At Station Houston on 2, Alexi is free to get on the treadmill.
We copy. Thank you.
So within a 15-day period, a trifecta of cargo craft arrived at the International Space Station. For the second time in space station history, 6 visiting vehicles at the station at the same time. The first time since STS-133 and the final flight of Discovery in 2011. 2 Soyuz vehicles, 2 Progress resupply vehicles, the orbital ATK Cygnus craft, and the SpaceX Dragon craft, which a few hours from now will be installed on the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module in a parking place right next to Cygnus, the first time that 2 U.S. commercial cargo craft will have occupied adjacent berthing positions at the International Space Station. This is Mission Control Houston, here in the flight control room. The lead flight control team for the capture of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft led by Flight Director Amit Kshatriya. Right behind him is Rebecca Peake, the wife of European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, who used the station's robotic arm to reach out and capture the Dragon cargo craft a few minutes ago. On this early Sunday morning, the capture occurring again at 6:23 a.m. Central Time, 7:23 a.m. Eastern Time, as the International Space Station and Dragon flew 250 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean just west of Hawaii. With Dragon having been successfully captured some 36 hours after its launch atop the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, the crew will move into a midday meal before they monitor the maneuvering of the Dragon by the robotics officer here in Mission Control to the installation position along the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. There will be a period here between the end of our rendezvous and grapple coverage until the start of our installation coverage, which now will begin at 8:45 a.m. Central Time, 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, we'll be back on the air at 8:45 a.m. Central Time, 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time to monitor the robotic installation of the Dragon to the Earth-facing port of Harmony and its bolting into place on the common berthing mechanism. 4 gangs of 4 bolts apiece, 16 bolts in all, to be engaged to form a hard mate between Dragon and the Harmony module. Again, Dragon to occupy the installation point at the Earth-facing side of Harmony alongside the orbital ATK Cygnus cargo craft, the first time that 2 U.S. commercial cargo vehicles will be at the station in adjacent parking places at the same time. So for now, we'll wrap up our coverage, and again, Dragon executed a textbook rendezvous to the International Space Station from the time of its launch back on Friday afternoon from Cape Canaveral, arriving at the station in perfect fashion, grappled at 6:23 a.m. Central Time by European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake using the station's robotic arm. You're looking at Dragon in the grasp of the robotic arm, soon to be maneuvered to its installation position. So with that, we'll wrap up our coverage for now. We'll be back with you in a little over 2 hours at 8:45 a.m. Central Time, 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time for the installation of Dragon to the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module. Until then, this is Mission Control Houston.
a journey that started with the dreams and determination of men and women around this nation. A journey that set course from Florida's Space Coast. A journey of real innovators from California's Silicon Valley. A voyage of experimentation soaring above the Tidewater region and the high southern desert of California. One of humankind's greatest adventures, a magnificent journey that took vision from Texas to Ohio, from Louisiana to Alabama, and from all around this great nation.